Good evening and welcome to Mera TV Canada's Election Watch. My name is David Craig. Obviously, we are now post-election, about a week since Canada went to the polls, and we're going to continue monitoring all of the things that keep on happening within the world of Canada, the news, what's happening amongst the provinces, what's happening with Prime Minister Mark Carney as he moves forward with his government in Canada. There's a lot of things to get to. I'm going to be joined in a couple minutes here by political commentator, Toronto Sun writer, columnist Brian Lilley. We're going to be getting into some deep topics regarding President Trump, Mark Carney, Prime Minister Mark Carney, how their first meeting go, as well as some other things I want to pick his brain on. But before that, two things that I want to focus on today before we get into chatting with Brian is, first and foremost, Prime Minister Mark Carney did meet today with President Donald Trump. This is their first meeting, their first official meeting that they have had since Prime Minister Mark Carney has taken the offices of Prime Minister, as well as his party, the Liberal Party, forming a minority government. It's really interesting. I was watching along to see the comments back and forth. President Donald Trump was his normal fashion. President Donald Trump cracking jokes, being friendly, but also being strong on several issues. And I have to give credit where credit is due. I did think Mark Carney had great opening statements. I thought that his opening statement of stating that we can work together, there can be prosperity between both countries, respecting each other. President Donald Trump did reciprocate, saying we're friends with Canada. We want to maintain friendship. We want to continue being friends with Canada and find those wins. Mark Carney did express several things that have obviously been of concern to Donald Trump regarding the border security, how we're going to put added money and added investment into Canada's borders. Another issue that he brought up was fentanyl, saying how we are going to continue to crack down on fentanyl in general in Canada, but also crossing the border. So there were some good opening remarks. I thought politically it was well. I thought it was an olive branch in the sense of we want to work together. So again, credit where credit is due. That was a great start. Several other things that I thought were very interesting is Donald Trump did make a joke by saying that, about the 51st state and calling Prime Minister Justin Trudeau Governor Justin Trudeau. And Mark Carney did reiterate that Canada is not for sale. And he likened it to the fact that there are several things in this world that aren't for sale, like the White House, for example, or even you go into Buckingham Palace in the UK. Those aren't for sale. And he also likened to say Canada is not for sale, but we do want to work together and find ways to make a partnership. So I think that all is great, but it's going to be interesting to find out how that actually plays out, because a reporter asked President Donald Trump there, are you going to drop or lower the Canadian tariffs until you guys make a deal? And Donald Trump just said no. Flat out, he just said it's not going to happen until we actually make a deal. So at least they're coming to the table to have the conversations, but we're going to find out what does that look like, because Canada spoke and they want Prime Minister Mark Carney to deal with this tariff. But the interesting thing to me, and this is the part that might fall under the umbrella of being slightly deceptive, I would say, is that Mark Carney and the Liberals did run on the sentiment of anti-American sentiment. This idea of fear-mongering, this idea of we have to maintain our sovereignty from the threat that is Donald Trump and the threat that is the United States with tariffs, what they're going to do to our economy. That is the sentiment, and that is essentially one of the strongest cries that came from the Liberal campaign regarding this. But now, all of a sudden, when he's meeting with Donald Trump, I understand you have to put your best foot forward. It actually looks like what's coming to light is there seems to be a lot more of a friendship, a lot less of a threat than what was expected, and a lot more openness in the sense of working together and moving forward. Mark Carney said there'll have to be some things that will have to be redone with the USMCA, but he has made statements during his election that we have to fundamentally reimagine the Canadian economy, but also our relationship as we know it with the United States is over. That is a quote from Prime Minister Mark Carney during his campaign. So the question is, did he run on something that really wasn't the case, or was he capitalizing on something that spreads really easily, which is fear? Fear spreads extremely easily. If you ever want to control a populace, if you ever want to influence a populace drastically, fear is the fastest way to get people to listen up and to agree to something. My point in saying that, is this something that we need to bring up and discuss as citizens about running on sentiments that are false, or Did Canada get duped? That's a big question we have to ask ourselves. We're going to find out as we move towards and watch Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump talk about this. Another quick thing I wanted to highlight was Premier Danielle Smith. She addressed Albertans and also Canadians on Monday with a pretty impactful speech talking about Alberta, about the path forward for Alberta, talking about 4 main points that we're going to hold the federal government accountable to, which has to do access to the seaports in the Arctic Ocean, Pacific, and the Atlantic Ocean, as well as finding parity with equalization payments and looking at that. Also figuring out how to get our natural energy out to the world. So that's another issue she brought up, saying we need to figure this out. And now she actually used the word demands. Something that was really interesting that she said as well. She opened up by talking about the discrepancy between the Federation of Canada. Basically, the discrepancy between the balance of power of federal and provincial, and Alberta needs to be able to go down a process. The biggest thing that she discussed was about the referendum, about Alberta independence. She addressed it as the elephant in the room. And I actually have to give her a lot of credit for how she handled this, because the way that she brought this up was she did not want to be someone who is promoting separation and being a government that wants to go rogue in Canada. But she is also at the same time representing Albertans, saying if there is enough citizens of Alberta that want to move forward on a referendum idea and explore the idea of independence, her government will honor what Albertans have said. So she's not going to initiate it, but she said if there are groups that can gather enough information, they will look at moving forward with this in 2026 and will go through the necessary steps. Very important. It's worth watching. I thought it was it will go down as a historic speech looking back, because I think it's actually a really good example of how to navigate a really tough situation. Anyways, we will be back in just a moment with political commentator Brian Lilley. Welcome back to Merit TV Canada's Election Watch. You know, we're going to be joined right away by political commentator and columnist with the Toronto Sun, Brian Lilley, to talk about the events that have been unfolding since the election day. Specifically, one thing I want to focus on today as well is our Prime Minister Mark Carney is down in the United States and he is visiting with President Donald Trump. Obviously, this is their first meeting. So, Brian, this is an important meeting, the first, I'm hoping, of many meetings as we move forward. It's a high-stakes meeting, as there's been a lot of talk from Donald Trump about the 51st state with Canada. Obviously, Mark Carney ran on the sentiment of anti-American sentiment in the sense of we are going to maintain our sovereignty. Can you talk us through how this first meeting went?
About as well as you could hope. Nothing went off the rails. There was no Zelensky moment with Carney being kicked out. They held a news conference and then they went to lunch. If you recall, Zelensky didn't make it to lunch, and the lunch they had set out for the Ukrainian delegation and the Americans was fed to young White House staffers. So they made it to lunch. That's a good thing. Started off with Donald Trump being very complimentary to Mark Carney, talking about what a great election he had. This guy came up through the ranks. Well, he didn't really. So Trump was saying a lot of things that weren't quite accurate, but praising Carney while doing it, saying he watched the debate and thought he did a really good debate performance. And then, Carney returned the favor, talked about how Trump was a transformational president, that he wanted to work with him. And my government will have a bigger focus on the economy and on our defense and securing the Arctic, and fentanyl, all things that are music to Trump's ears. So it started off with them praising each other, complimenting each other. And then, of course, you get into the weeds and things like 51st state and trade irritants. And, they were able to keep it on track, though.
Well, Trump seems to continue to make statements about Canada being a 51st state or for sale. How did Mark Carney seem to handle this?
So it came up from a reporter asking the question. Trump did not raise it directly, but when asked about it, it's interesting. It was a very different take than we've seen from him before. He said, well, I still think it would be good, but it takes two to tango. And if both sides want to do it, we'll talk about it and we'll go forward. But that's not what we're here about. But I still think it'd be really good for Canada. I still think, this would be great for the Canadian people. Mark Carney just calmly said, Mr. President, there are some places that are never for sale, like the building we're in right now, the White House or Buckingham Palace. And he said, I can tell you, having spent the last couple months talking to the owners of Canada during the election campaign, Canada's not for sale. And, we're not interested in the 51st state. It was handled fairly well. Like, I think Mark Carney did the best job he could in the situation throughout the back and forth with the media, kind of a freewheeling scrum as they're sitting there in the Oval Office. The issue did come back a couple of times, and Trump said never say never, and maybe we can find a way. But it that was a point where it really could have gone off the rails, and it didn't. Towards the end on trade, that's where things got a little bit dicey.
Okay. Among the conversations, tariff talk is a major topic. Obviously, trade is a major topic as well. However, here in Alberta, the biggest impact isn't related to that. It actually has to do with the price of oil. I'm interested, has Carney given any indication about making moves that could help Alberta and help Alberta see better oil prices in the future?
Donald Trump did talk about oil and the energy that both countries have and how, tremendous that is. We didn't hear from Carney in the meeting about that. I have not seen him say anything that would lead me to believe that he is going to uh, take his focus off clean energy. Throughout the election campaign, we heard him talk about making Canada an energy superpower in conventional and clean energy. He really didn't like using the words oil, gas, or pipeline. But I think given the political climate, Mark Carney and his team would be very smart to offer some kind of olive branch to Alberta. He's got to bring down the temperature on um, Alberta separatist sentiment, and I know the vast majority of Albertans are not there yet. But you don't want to let that fester to where it goes from 20, 25, 30% to 40, 45, 50%. You don't want it to get there.
Hmm.
And it's incumbent
Okay.
upon any prime minister to focus on national unity. And right now, issues of national unity need to be dealt with in the prairies, in
Good.
Alberta and next door in Saskatchewan. By the way, everyone's talking about you guys. The latest polling I saw showed more people in Saskatchewan ready to bolt than in Alberta. Not by much, but a little bit. So the prime minister needs to be able to go in and offer something, whether that is a pipeline or if he's not going to get rid of C-69, because I've talked to some liberals that say, no, we still need that there so that we can deal with First Nations issues and get the projects through the courts. Okay, well, if that's what it is, then map out your changes to C-69 and map out which pipelines you will approve and how you will approve them. Start talking about the demands that Premier Smith made. I was looking at the spot price of oil, and Western Canadian Select down at $44 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate in the 50s. A little while ago, those were trading at $80 and $70 respectively. That was within the last year. That was within 8, 9 months. So that's a tremendous hit to the Alberta economy, which means it's a tremendous hit to the Canadian economy. Making those overtures and offering the olive branch, that would help the Canadian economy.
One thing that kind of caught me off guard, I believe it was yesterday when President Donald Trump started throwing out more tariff talk, but specifically when it has to do with the movie industry, talking about putting 100% tariff on movies essentially that are outside of the U.S. coming into the U.S. This has a big impact, or potentially could have a big impact here in Canada with what we do in film and production. Can you maybe let us know what would that look like? In your opinion, how would that work? And is that going to raise the cost of movies, or is this going to affect our jobs? What's your thoughts?
I, well, would I'm not sure, and he is talking about it a lot, but he hasn't given any details. And Howard Lutnick, his Commerce Secretary, has talked about it. Why are films produced elsewhere? He said with his gravelly voice on Larry Kudlow's show. Uh, so, okay, let's we've got little movie hubs all across Canada. We've got them across the United States. Part of the reason for that is all the movies used to be shot in New York and Hollywood and became very expensive. It was tough to find the crews to be able to, staff the movies. They added regulations and red tape and permits and just made it impossible. And so the movie industry is now spread out all over. So would they say if you shot a movie in Alberta, let's say, or like the Last of Us TV show was shot there, or the movie Remnant, if that's shot there, do they then say, well, if you want to show it in America, you're going to pay a tariff on all the expenses of the Canadian crew? Because I doubt they would consider the salary of the American star living in Beverly Hills paying U.S. taxes to be something that you're going to tariff them on. But they might tariff the cost of everything that was spent in Canada on the cruise, on the catering, things like that. Basically, just try and make it more expensive so that you force production back to the United States. But this is a very strange one, but one that seems to have caught the president's attention. I think he even mentioned it in the meeting with Carney. We'll see if find out later if he discussed it over lunch with him.
Well, let's get back to Canada for a second. Most auto parts in Canada are still being exempt from American tariffs, but not vehicles. How big has the layoff impact been so far here in Canada?
It's between 1,500 and 2,000 people laid off. That's at the Stellantis plant, the old Chrysler plant. They make the Chrysler Pacifica, the minivan. They make the Dodge Charger there. And the General Motors plant in Oshawa, a few hours drive away, where they make things like the Chevy Silverado. So, yeah, in terms of GM, that is almost exclusively related to the tariff issue. In Windsor at the Stellantis plant, it's a combination of the tariffs, but also they're retooling their line for the upcoming production of the new models. But the tariffs are making it that much more
Okay.
things are not stable. It's unstable in terms of how things will go forward. So it is really hurting. And then of course those have knock-on effects on the parts makers. So right now the Stellantis plant, it's a 1 to 2 week layoff there. They've lost an entire shift at the General Motors plant. So that's 750 workers there, 750 in Windsor. You don't want it to go down to from 3 to 2 to 1 shift at a plant like that, because if you start going in that direction, the whole plant just closes.
There's been a lot of attention that has been put on the United States and President Donald Trump in regards to tariffs that is moving towards Canada, the threat of tariffs for the Canadian economy and Canada's future. But there has not been enough light shed on the fact that there are tariffs on pork and canola that are imposed by China on Canada. We haven't given that enough attention, and that actually has an impact on us. Any chance that those could be lifted soon?
So those are with China, and it's in retaliation for our tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. And I understand Premier Smith's frustration on that front, because we imposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to protect the electric vehicle market, that's just starting to grow in Ontario. And she says, well, it's non-existent, and we've got real jobs that are at stake. And so China retaliates with tariffs on canola and pork. I don't know what the answer is. I do know that China's, the reason that the tariffs were put on, it started with the Biden administration, and we had to follow suit not to be offside of them. And Trump has kept them in place. And if we go offside of Trump on that, we're going to be, facing tariffs on all kinds of goods. And so, yeah, it's painful. And hopefully for the canola farmers, they can find different markets. But I'm not sure that we're going to see a solution on that anytime soon. China's entire economic strategy, whether it's EVs or something else, is to go in, flood the market with cheap product, get you addicted to it, and then make sure that they're the dominant one. And if we allow that to happen, there will be zero auto industry in North America. And that's why the Biden administration, followed by Trump, said, we're doing this and you have to follow. If we lift those EV tariffs to get the canola tariffs off, we're in for a whole heap of trouble from the Americans on a number of other fronts.
I want to shift our attention to Pierre Poilievre, and it's been a week and a half since he lost his seat in the House of Commons. We now know that he is going to be picking up a seat here in Alberta, or at least running in a by-election to be able to get that seat. Pierre Poilievre met with his caucus today, and from what I understood, there is no real attempt to push him out as leader, but the party does need to find an interim leader to sit in the House of Commons for the spring sitting. But because Poilievre is no longer an MP, how safe is Pierre Poilievre's position without actually being a sitting MP, but still maintaining his leadership of the Conservative Party?
It is only going to be about 3 weeks of sitting, and based on timing, we should see Pierre Poilievre back in the House of Commons in time for the September sitting, and he will be representing an Alberta riding. We assume by then, Battle for Crowfoot, I believe it is. Sorry, probably Battle Creek Crowfoot. I've got the name wrong there. Yeah, and he was out visiting there. He was in Consort, Alberta, the other day, meeting with Damien Crook and his team. Went to Crook's family farm, met the campaign staff. He's looking forward to that. It appears that he's safe for now, but you have to remember that when the Conservatives lost the 2019 election, that was October 2019, wasn't until December that Andrew Scheer was gone. Things started dropping in November and into early December, and then Scheer took the decision to step down. I remember going to chat with him in his office, and I could tell at that point that he was going to leave. Aaron O'Toole, he lost the election in September 2021. He wasn't taken out until February 2022. So we could see something happen, but we're just over a week since the election. I haven't been receiving phone calls from high-ranking members of the party saying Pierre's got to go. You haven't seen people organizing yet. If we see those things happen in the next few weeks, he could be in trouble. At this point, he seems to have the support of the caucus and the grassroots, and that's what any leader needs.
Do you think that we could see some staffing changes amongst the Conservatives? There has been a lot of fingers pointed at Conservative campaign manager Jenny Byrne. I'm wondering, do you think she'll be forced out?
Well, Jamil Jivani, Conservative MP, was just out doing another interview talking about Doug Ford and how Doug Ford is the problem. Ford and Jivani have a personal animosity, and that's what it is with so much of these. It's personal relationships that have gone sour. And so my advice in my columns and in phone calls with people is you got to put that aside. If you want to keep on fighting, you're not going to win. You've got to put that aside. I think once the dust settles with Pierre and his by-election, I think or maybe even before then, I think you're going to see him try and, if he's smart, meet with people like Doug Ford, meet with people like Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston, with Peter MacKay. Try and build bridges with the different parts of your coalition that you need, because they froze a lot of them out at the federal level over the past 2 years because they were riding so high in the polls. And then when things tightened up and they needed them, those folks weren't there. You want them on your side. You want everybody working to get you elected. Let's hope that that's how they operate going forward.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate every time you join us to give us your thoughts on what is going on. Brian Lilley with the Toronto Sun and political commentator. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, welcome back to Merit TV Canada's Election Watch. A lot to digest as we look at Prime Minister Mark Carney as he visits with Donald Trump. If you have not watched that, you can watch that on CPAC as well. Go look at the whole conversation they had publicly. It was very interesting to see the dynamics between the two. I actually thought there was a bit of a camaraderie that they had. You could tell that they've got a relationship from the past by Donald Trump at some point, kind of slapping Mark Carney's knee and the jesting there. And also the compliments that Mark Carney, or I should say the compliments that President Donald Trump gave Mark Carney, saying, what a historic comeback you guys had in Canada. And he goes, it might even be greater than my comeback in the U.S. You can tell there's a friendship sentiment there, which hopefully will bode well for Canadians. But again, the question is, were we misled from Mark Carney in terms of his relationship with Donald Trump and their strategy to label Pierre Poilievre as a Trumper in that sense? Obviously, it seems to have paid off for them and worked for them. The question is, will it pay off for Canadians? Time will tell, but as citizens, we need to be on guard, on watch, as well holding our government to account to make sure that we are making the right deals that we need so that we have a Canada first mentality to make Canada prosper. As well, lots to take in from Brian Lilley and his comments, but we will keep on coming back this week with more and more insights as to what's happening as events unfold and evolve. Thank you for watching Merit TV Canada. My name's David Craig. Good evening.